I just want you to, because I know the context. And what is so crazy is the context that this was said in was to say, let's ratchet things down a bit. And I'm going to give everybody a mulligan because everybody makes mistakes. You were talking to the left. You weren't talking about Donald Trump.
That's exactly right. I was talking to, and in that sense, in defense of some of my colleagues on the far left who had said some really inflammatory stuff that rivals a lot of the things that are being attacked that have been said by people on the right. And so I said, look, referring specifically to those people on the left, people like AOC, Kamala Harris,
Schumer,
Cory Booker, and Chuck Schumer. I said, everyone from time to time says something that they regret, and they probably ought to take a mulligan on this one. Everyone's entitled to one of those once in a while. But the point is, we shouldn't be saying things like this. In no way, shape, or form did I say that President Trump ought to be taking a mulligan on this. That had nothing to do with President Trump. And yet somehow the geniuses at New York Times and the geniuses at Fox 13 in Salt Lake City and about 50 other news outlets throughout the country picked it up and took exactly that message directly contrary to the fact. And the truth is, this reflects what can best be characterized as reckless disregard for the truth.
But
ironically,
they're going to be the arbiters of truth here soon, Mike.
Yeah,
they are pushing for it and trying to silence anyone that has a different opinion.
No, that's exactly right, and they're playing off of the famous Supreme Court case, New York Times versus Sullivan. It basically gives them impunity to defame people, so long as they're not acting with knowledge of falsity or reckless disregard for the truth. And yet, oddly enough, here they seem to have crossed that threshold.
Yeah, and I've got another one for you. They just wrote a story about me today in the New York Times that they knowingly are printing things that are just false as a news story. If it was an opinion piece, that'd be one thing. But this is a news story, and it's despicable, Mike. Let's talk a little bit about the impeachment trial itself. First of all, are you seeing any movement at all with anyone on either side? The Democrats making a good case, or any of the Republicans going, oh, I don't know, that's a good point?
Okay, look, here's what I'll tell you on that front. There's no doubt horrible things happened on January 6th. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt that we should have been able to avoid it. I wish we had been able to avoid it. I've said for a long time that I don't think that there should have been an effort to try to win the election on January 6th, because if you read the 12th Amendment and if you read Article 2 of the Constitution, they don't make that possible. It is the states that decide these things and not Congress.
Correct.
Congress is there only to count. It has one job: open and count, open and count. That's it. Mm-hmm. These things that happened on January 6th were tragic. They were horrific. All of that being the case, it is different than what is on trial this week. What's on trial this week is different than that. And there are a number of us, 44 of us to be precise, that don't believe that it's appropriate for the Senate to exercise jurisdiction as a court of impeachment after a president's term of office has expired.
Okay, can I give you something on this? Just to play devil's advocate, give Mike the quote from John Adams.
John Quincy Adams, yeah. Let's see. Here we go. I hold myself, so long as I have the breath of life in my body, amenable to impeachment by the House for everything I did during the time I held any public office.
Yeah, that's great. And I've seen that quote, and I understand his point. I don't think he's necessarily approaching this as a textualist. I don't think he's necessarily approaching this as someone who sees the abuse of government powers that can be brought to bear with an impeachment trial. I don't think he anticipated the issues that could arise as a result of it. Now, look, I will grant you this much. As a strict textual matter, it is a very close call. I actually think the text can be read one way or the other. thus requiring us to make some prudential judgment calls about how best it ought to fit into this framework. But when you look at the floodgates this thing would open, you imagine what would happen, just for example, the next time we have a red wave election. You'd see massive calls for impeachment proceedings on Hillary Clinton, for Benghazi, on Jim Comey, maybe even for Jimmy Carter, going back to the fact that he gave away the Panama Canal. This would result in an interminable succession of absurd impeachment proceedings. I don't think that's good for the country. I don't think we ought to give Congress that power.
So when the Chief Justice decided not to be seated for this, does this make this a kangaroo court? I mean, isn't that part of the Constitution?
First of all, it's not at all clear to me that the Chief Justice declined anything. From what I understand, the Chief Justice was never invited to preside.
What?
They knew that they knew that by the time we got the articles of impeachment, 10 days or so, mind you, after they had passed them, and nearly a week after President Trump had left office, they knew that he wasn't the president, and thus it wasn't appropriate to have the Chief Justice attend. Someone floated the rumor that he had been invited and declined. Now, unless there's something out there that's changed, that's simply not true. My understanding is that he was never invited in the first place. Why? Well, they knew he's not the president, and therefore there's no reason to have the Chief Justice preside.
Okay, so does it make this, I mean, is it constitutional to in impeachment? Doesn't it say the Supreme Court justice comes and is oversees it?
Yes. If, in fact, the president is being tried for impeachment. But here, we don't have the president or the vice president or any civil officers of the United States. You have a former president. It's a different thing. Doesn't require the Chief Justice to preside.
Oh.
And by my reading, it shouldn't allow us to have a trial at all. Now, this would have been different. That would have been a completely different set of questions we were facing. Have the House of Representatives initiated this process and actually delivered the articles of impeachment right after they passed them. They didn't. They sat on them. Why? I'm not really sure. You're going to have to ask Nancy Pelosi that question. But it makes a huge difference for them, and they really need to live with the consequences, and that's what they're facing now. It's one of the reasons why I don't think there will be a shift in the outcome of this impeachment. Remember, in order for an impeachment trial to be successful, you can have no more than 33 senators voting to acquit. We've got 44 already who are saying just on jurisdictional grounds alone, we shouldn't do this. And so unless something dramatic changes, which I don't see, we're nowhere close.
So then why are they doing this again? This is remarkable stuff. This, to me, leads to banana republic kind of stuff, because as you've just said, you know, you get a red wave, then who do they take out? This is what dictatorships do. This is what banana republics do. So what is their gain? What is the real goal, do you think, Mike?
It appears to me they're doing everything they can to smear Republicans, smear conservatives, smear people who support or supported Donald Trump at any moment. And all along the way, they're characterizing the evidence. In fact, it's not, at least so far, it's not like a normal trial. They're not bringing in witnesses. They're basically reciting things from news reports written by their liberal allies with the most smearing characterization they can possibly find. Some of them turn out to be inaccurate. I made an objection last night.
Yeah, I saw it.
To some evidence that they claimed to have that I personally knew about, and I asked that it be stricken because I knew it not to be true. Look, it's always hard for me to speak to another person's subjective intent. But what I do know is that they seem to be having a good time doing everything they can to just say Republicans are awful. And all of these people who supported Donald Trump are awful. And I think that's unfortunate.
So the problem with this is they are not only saying they're awful, but they're also using social media, the media itself, and the New York Times article today to silence people and to label them as violent extremists, We have 5,000 troops still on the ground in Washington, D.C. without a defined mission. That doesn't happen. The Department of Homeland Security says there is no credible or specific threat. What is going on, Mike? You can't keep calling half the country violent extremists. And I mean, because at some point you're like, well, then we got to do something about it. If they're all violent extremists, we have to do. Well, what do you do? This is not about an election anymore.
I'll tell you, Glenn, we have to take down that wall. Every day when I come into work, I have to pass this enormous wall with razor wire, with armed military all around it. Not only are these bad optics, this is bad substance. This is not who we are. This is not what we need to do. And I call on Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and my colleagues in the Senate and counterparts in the House to tear down this wall and do it now.
Mike Lee, thank you so much. Mike Lee, Senator of Utah. I'd like to talk to you more about that. It's interesting. I remember Reagan saying that. Never thought I would hear Mike Lee say those words to Chuck Schumer about a wall, let alone the wall around the Capitol. Tear down this wall.